You know that moment when you're scrolling through endless TV options, the pictures look insane on the website, every model promises cinematic scale and next-gen gaming. And then you finally click buy only to discover the screen is either too bright for a dim living room or just doesn't hold up when you actually press play on a sports broadcast? I've been there, and it's why I'm sitting down today to walk you through the 98-inch Sony K98XR50KIT1, so you can avoid that disappointment before it happens. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. First off, let's talk about the kind of space this thing needs. A 98-inch panel is roughly the size of a small movie theater screen, which means you need a wall that can accommodate roughly a 9 by 5 foot opening, and you'll want to sit back at least 8 feet away for a comfortable view. If your living room feels more like a studio apartment or you're planning to place the TV on a standard TV stand, this might be a tight fit. On the other hand, if you have a dedicated media room or a spacious family area, the sheer scale can turn an ordinary night into a real event, especially when you pair it with a darkroom configuration for those HDR movie marathons. Now, the mini LED technology is the headline here. Sony uses a bunch of tiny LEDs behind the LCD panel to boost contrast, giving you deeper blacks and brighter highlights than a typical LED TV. In practice, that means a nighttime sports game will still have the bright stadium lights pop without washing out the darker crowd sections. I tested a couple of recent football games on similar mini LED sets, and the difference is noticeable. The ball stays crisp while the background retains texture. That same technology also powers Dolby Vision, which you'll see when streaming a recent Disney Plus release. The colors feel more saturated, but they're not oversaturated. The XR processor does a decent job of keeping skin tones natural, which is something I've found missing on cheaper OLED alternatives that can sometimes look too plastic when bright. One of the strongest practical points is the high refresh rate. Sony advertises smooth motion for gaming and sports, and that's true if you have a console that can push 120 frames per second. For me, plugging a PlayStation 5 in performance mode delivered buttery smooth transitions during a fast-paced racing game, and there was no visible tearing. If you're more of a movie buff than a gamer, the benefit is subtler. You'll see less motion blur during an action sequence, but you won't necessarily notice the difference during a drama. The key is that the TV actually sustains those high frame rates without the dreaded halo effect that some other 4K panels develop at the edges of bright objects. Smart TV experience is another place where Sony tries to stand out. The interface is essentially Google TV, so you get voice search via your remote, and it's fully integrated with Google Assistant. If you already have smart home devices like lights or thermostats, you can dim the lights or change the room temperature without leaving the couch. The downside is that the overall UI feels a bit more cluttered than the leaner platforms you see on some competitors. You'll have a row of your picks and a shelf of continue watching that can feel crowded when you have a lot of apps installed. However, the biggest practical advantage is the ability to launch apps like Netflix, Prime Video, or Disney Plus directly from voice commands, no scrolling through endless menus, which is a small but genuine time saver if you're binge watching. What about the audio? Sony's built-in speakers are decent for a TV of this size, delivering clear dialogue and a respectable bass punch for a built-in system. But when you're dealing with a 98-inch screen, the sound will inevitably feel underpowered if you're trying to fill a large room. In my experience, you'll want to supplement it with a soundbar or a modest 2.1 speaker system to get a truly immersive experience. That's not a flaw per se, it's more of an expected trade-off for a TV that leans heavily on its picture performance. If we talk value, the price tag sits in the upper mid-range for 98-inch displays. When you compare it to a 75-inch OLED that costs about the same, you're essentially deciding between raw brightness and true blacks versus perfect contrast. The mini LED panel shines in a bright room or when you have plenty of ambient light, while OLED would be better for dark home theaters. For families with kids or pet owners, the mini LED's higher peak brightness also helps hide minor reflections off glossy finishes, which can be a subtle but real annoyance. Who should buy this? If you already have a suitably large wall or a dedicated media room, enjoy a mix of sports, movies, and next-gen gaming, and you don't mind adding a soundbar for full room audio, this TV checks a lot of boxes. The built-in Google TV ecosystem will also appeal to anyone who is already entrenched in the Google ecosystem and wants voice control without buying.